So hello everyone, thank you to be here, and I'm very happy to give our welcome to Bianca Galmarini, who is a PhD candidate in urban and regional planning at University of Florence. She's also a member of the group of research called LabSo, Sociological Laboratory on Design, Architecture, City and Territory, and in her past research, she also worked with plant scientists searching for plant-based solutions in architecture. Her main areas of research are the socio-economic transformations generated by urban greening interventions. So I think that Bianca could immediately start her presentation and we can talk together again after during the debate time. So Bianca, if you want to start and sharing the screen, we are listening to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Andrea, for introducing me. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss some of what I consider the main interesting topics in my research. So let's start. Let's start from, well, the title of this presentation. I prepared a brief presentation. So the title of the speech is Beware of the Green Orthodoxy, which is, well, green orthodoxy is an expression that I'm quoting from a work from Isabel Angelowski, which is a Spanish Catalan researcher, scholar. It's a critical analysis on urban greening. Why are we talking about urban greening? Because, please let me make some assumption. The majority of people is living in cities, and more people will in the next future live in cities, I think. So cities is definitely the scenario of our development of our future, and they will play a key role in what we call the ecological transition. So every kind of sustainable strategies that we're going to develop must consider cities as a very important issue. And in this time, cities will face a double challenge because they must be able to host an increasing number of people, and at the same time to face the climate change events, even when destructive or unpredicted. So once again, we really need to change our city, to prepare our city to the effect of climate change. How to do it? Well, one answer is to green cities, because greening cities make them more livable, more resilient, more healthy, more biodiverse, so it definitely more sustainable. So why greening people? Because greening cities, because we need to put trees and plants inside the cities. Trees and plants are crucial in this moment, and they are crucial to the extent that some very controversial model of intervention use trees to quantify the needs of sequestrating carbon dioxide. So, to be clear, in science, some 2 years ago, just 3 years ago, some scholars published a very famous article in Science Review, claiming that we need to compensate the anthropogenic ecological footprint of our way of production, way of living, way of changing the environment, and that we can do it by planting an enormous amount of trees, which is 1,000 billion, and that we can do it by it. Well, it's very controversial. As you can see, it has been discussed and criticized because, of course, it's not enough planting trees. But this is to give you the idea of why plants are so crucial, are so key in this moment. Planting trees in cities provides several economical, social, health, environmental, of course, benefits, and tackle some of the major issues of climate change, like flood risks, health, air pollution. So, well, not only, there are very interesting research that show us that exposure to green spaces is associated with low rate of diseases, with low chronic stress, with better cognitive performances, an increased safety perception, personal satisfaction, social interaction, neighborhood attachment. So really, they solve a lot of problems. So definitely, we need
I think her internet is having trouble.
Mm-hmm.
This is
system. What? Sorry?
We didn't hear you for like 1 minute, Bianca, because your internet stopped.
Okay. I don't, if you think that it's useful, I can stop the video. I can like just sharing.
Let's try.
Maybe. Okay. I try it. And okay, so what were we saying? Did you hear the part in which I'm starting to define, well, the benefits about plants in cities, right?
Again.
Or
yes.
Okay. Well, okay, perfect. So I passed. Okay. So we were talking about greening cities. What does it means to green cities? What does it mean urban forestry? Urban forestry definitions includes includes parks, includes woodlands, includes forests, includes street trees, avenues, what we call pocket parks, parklets and stuff, every kind of every type of green spaces. So the challenge is how to create new green spaces in the city. And the research about this topic is flourishing. Plant-based solution can be considered as one of the current design research frontiers. So where to put this green material and how to do it in the most cost, research and space efficient, replicable, and also attractive way is a challenge for architects, engineers and planners, or at least for the most updated and sensible among them. Well, not only it's green infrastructure and natural-based solution are at the forefront of the agenda in Europe. So, and by plant-based solution and natural-based solution, we intend all the solutions based on using or inspired by plants and nature. So just to define, but I'm sure that it's a very common concept. So anyway, it's a great and challenging, always new, innovative field of research. And of course, it has the value of taking off the focus from the non-natural based high-tech solution, which are more expensive and which have a larger carbon footprint. So what's the problem? Well, thanks to the development of technologies and tools for monitoring and modeling environmental variation and benefits, we are now able to predict the benefits they provide and to translate them into an economic value, which is easier to communicate and more attractive. And this is a point, because the enthusiasm that comes with greening interventions does not take into account the effect that it can produce, which is very strictly related to the economic phase. Focusing on simply implementing green infrastructure in the city denotes a limited view of what it means to bring green into the city. Because the question that we need to ask ourselves is, if this green, if creating green spaces is always a public good, if it always has widespread benefits for all residents or not, or if it can also acutize, increase some injustice in city. That is what scholars have defined green orthodoxy, this a critical approach to urban greening. And relating to the cities, green orthodoxy can be defined as a technocratic discourse on urban sustainability, which, as we have said, emphasize positive impacts, which are present, of course, but avoid consideration on socio-spatial outcomes. That could be, as we have said, positive, but also negative when creating new dynamics of exclusion, segregation, inequalities. Even when driven by ecological premises, no intervention in urban space is neutral nor totally positive. And this applies as well to greening. Please notice that this is not a theoretical debate. Several scholars, among them as Isabel Angelowski or Dagmar Hase, have studied cases of unwanted or wanted unjust outcomes of greening in cities. And the picture that we are showing in this slide, the High Line project, is one of the most famous cases. It is the High Line Park in New York City, which is an elevated railroad converted into a linear park. It's very beautiful. And this started as a neighborhood initiative. So citizens, residents asked for this abandoned railroad to be converted into a green area. But it ended with forcing original residents to leave because of the rise of property prices, which doubled in less than 10 years. And we are in one of the most expensive cities in the world. So even being an amazing greening project, very interesting and very, I mean, I went there, it's fantastic. But he has been part of a high-rise development, expulsion processes, and unjust dynamics in the city. So of course, greening strategies can target social inclusion, but it can also generate gentrification, as in this case, because they can cause a displacement of people or residents. Which kind of residents? The most vulnerable. So the low income, maybe the elder, or sometimes there are some ethnical and racial issues involved in this kind of processes. So it's a very it's really a complex issue. We have more examples. For one of the most interesting, I think, it's one in Berlin. It's the Tempelhofer Park case, which was, Tempelhofer was an open, big area. There was a former airport there. And in this occasion too, citizens insist, they voted with a plebiscite to maintain the open area, to transform it into a park instead of housing development. By conserving, by maintaining, by protecting this park, the area knows a high-end development. So at the end, once again, part of them were expulsed, well displaced. So really, it's I think it's very. I think that we cannot. I mean, we have a lot of examples. We cannot. The point here is not accepting a critical, apolitical view of greening as only positive and only beneficial for the city. Also because, to be honest, the effect of greening on the rise of property on the real estate market is not an unknown phenomenon. I mean, it doesn't come after this acknowledgement. Because among the literature on greening benefits, there is a sector that is dedicated to the positive impact of greening on real estate markets. And this is understandable. I think it's clear. Green areas make cities and neighborhoods more livable and desirable, and that makes them more competitive in the global market. So once again, this perspective, pretending urban greening to be neutral and with no impacts on economic urban dynamics, means, for example, accepting it to be incorporated in the neoliberal development of the city. So let's add some elements again. We've talked, okay, one of the problem is the accessibility of green solutions. Who has access and who benefit from the new green spaces? Or is environmental quality in cities something that citizens have to afford, or is it a right? Otherwise, if we don't ask these things, the intervention is a form of exclusion, as we've seen. Another risk in green intervention is standardizing green solutions. If we want to design for adaptation, we need to deep understand the territories and the expected impact of the climate crisis, the specific needs each cities, and the way in which each new green space fits in the urban ecological system. This information is not available everywhere, must be produced and must be updated. And the production and selection of information in this case, the single production of the information is not an apolitical or neutral process. It is an explicit stance and a priority setting. We have several examples of, for example, just mentioning green belt solution. So creating a forest around the city to to limit the expansion of the city. This kind of green belt can be developed in many different ways, and choosing which are the most vulnerable territories, monitoring the transformation of the territory, choosing the places in which to develop this belt can really impact the city, the development of the city, the internal dynamics. So also this kind of information collection is really relevant to the success of the solution. We have another point. We have the care dimension. Because plants and trees are living entities, are living beings, and their survival is essential for the success of greening intervention, of course. Their prosperity is essential. So who would take care of green spaces? Are citizens involved in the management? And if they are not, how does it affect the intervention? Why am I stressing these aspects? Because the utopias of green cities, of garden cities, or more recently, to quote Anne Winstonsport, of granite gardens, well, these utopias are more than 100 years old. But in the past, for the garden cities of the anarchisms of Béziner Howard, for example, for French utopias of the Enlightenment, for the modernization of Paris made by Haussmann, for the American Park movement, for the functionalist of modern movement, for the Dutch ecological movement or German nationalism. Well, for all them, green was, and park and avenues, well, green in its forms, were an essential component of a very precise vision of the city, of the functioning of the city, its relationship with the territory and the citizens. So today, invoking the environmental benefit as a top priority should not relieve us from those reflections on the city to which we are always called. Here we are seeing, well, in the slides, sorry for not presenting before, we are seeing a suggestion. It's part of a research project which is called the Green Deep. It's a suggestion, it's a view of Milan covered by plants. And I think it's a controversial image because it's interesting, it's very inspiring. In a way, it's impossible because we are not solving problem. We are just suggesting more a feeling, a green city as a feeling. But it's an example of how we are treating this stuff. We are talking about we have a quantitative perspective. We are not rethinking dynamic or power in the city. We are not discussing the way of use the city. We are not discussing the management and the access to public space. We are saying the more trees there are in the city, the better, the healthier, the more beautiful is the city. The more carbon dioxide I can capture with plants, the better my administration is working. And I think that this is not enough. I mean, we have seen that this is not enough. It does not radically innovate. It does not change the relationship between the mineral and the vegetal components of the city. It does not challenge the image and the narrative of the city that we have. So this is a very famous project or at least it is in Italy. It's the vertical forest. It's a skyscraper in which balconies are cultivated trees. It's made by an important architect, Italian architect, which is Stefano Boeri, and which for this kind of project has also been called as one of the speakers, for example, of the UN Climate Action Summit in the 2019, or is a consultant for FAO, and so it's a very relevant personality. Looking at this kind of project, I ask, which kind of green solution is it? Which kind of greening is proposing? What does it tell us? It's presented as a new prototype for a new format of architectural biodiversity, as a way to, as a new relationship proposal between humans and other living species. I have been also said that it's a first step towards a new architecture and so on. I think it's a very successful one. It's a very convincing one, but it fails in some of the goals that we were talking about. It was not assumed to do it. It's not planning. It's not an administration. It's an architect and it's proposing something. But I think that we can use this project to make some reflection. And the question here are, which kind of urban experience, of dwelling experience are proposed here? If the inhabitants, as it is, are not allowed to take care of the plants because the management is, there are some professionals that take care of them, that manage the plants. So if we can have, we can have a balcony with wonderful trees, but we cannot interact with them. It does not change this building, this apartment does not change the way in which we, or not so much, the way in which we work and live with nature. So does it really drive a new idea of the city, a more sustainable one? And focusing on the name, the vertical forest is what we mean by forest. We have in mind the definition at the beginning, in which I said that urban forest includes every green space with trees. So every space in the city in which we can find trees. But we have also talked about the problem of accessibility of green amenities in cities. So can the new green city be based on this kind of solutions? Is a city made of vertical forest a real green city? Because I think that here there's a problem. This green space is not accessible, is not open, is not usable in different ways, and at the same time by people with different characteristics or social extraction. So putting aside for a second the intention and the aims of the designer, which are of course positive, if we accept it as a new kind of green space, we may accept public programs of green intervention to be shaped like this, or to be or the public administration to be unloaded by this kind of intervention. For example, in Italy, when you build a new construction, you are obliged to make some primary urbanization works to make it possible to live there. So, for example, if you construct a new building, you need to build the street to reach the building, the parking lots, you need to fix the water system, and you need to create green space. So green space are part of this public primary urbanization work. And it's something that investors and builders, constructors leave to the city. So wood vertical forests have the right to be presented as a primary urbanization work. I mean, it's maybe it's not the case, but I think it's interesting to reflect on this, because of course it would be very convenient for the investors, but in my opinion, well, I hope it won't. So so we can't treat greening from a simply quantitative or technological perspective in terms of sum of benefits, because otherwise we could find ourselves designing in the sustainable era, which we are living in, as we did in that of modernism, define nature-based solution as standards, with the claim of defining needs and then proceeding to inscribe these needs univocally in space. But today, the complexity of relation, the velocity of transformation in cities make it impossible to act this way. In this fragmented vision in which green spaces are broken up into different typological components, which is it's funny because it's kind of a process that this nature itself, that distorts nature, we will be legitimated to choose one typology instead of another, following the criteria of efficiency, cost, immediate feasibility. For example, we may choose to implement cultivated green roof instead of community gardens. In terms of ecological benefits, there may be no difference between them. But in terms of impact on the city, there are a lot. So once again, without an overview of the city and its uses, we will not be able to investigate the dynamics that each solution can trigger in the city. Are we sure that using plants, as in this case, in the image I'm sharing, like plants are kind of building blocks? It's a very deep research on the species and the possibility to green cities in every part of the world. It's a very excellent research. But here, I mean, it can be a support, but it cannot lead, guide, drive the greening interventions. Because here plants, in my opinion, are used as building blocks. And I don't think it's a successful way. Of course, it's interesting because these blocks of nature can be scattered, diffused in space. Perhaps they are more compatible with the current layout of cities. They allow punctual interventions, but urban planning is a discipline of strategy, not only of tactics. So again, what is the overall vision? How will we use this greening? Will be greening a remedy for development, or will it be a tool for development? I use a very recent master plan project to present this question, this topic, but we need to keep in mind that very similar questions have been posed in the last century concerning parks in urban landscape. And different countries and economies answer differently. Some choose to follow market rules, leaving investors driving expansion of cities and using park as an amenity and a tool for speculation. Other chose more democratic approach, answering social demands for open spaces or private garden. It's the case, for example, for German experience. German Volkspark is explicitly designed to encourage social interaction and to introduce workers to sport and health practices. So it has been considered as a necessary spending for the administration as a right for citizens. So we have a history of landscape plannings that we can see, that we can study. And in this history, simply modifying the park, simply working on the typology and the design of the park, have had a political and revolutionary power. For example, shifting from a design and a solution of park inside the city or around the city, the dimension of the park, the accessibility of the park, reflecting on the design of the parks. For example, made a shift from a city to be with nature, so being superior of nature and hosting the nature, or becoming a part of the nature, so in a more ecological view. It's time for doing the same. It's time for discussing with the same intention and political commitment. And that's my invitation. Let's go further. Today we have more sophisticated tools to measure benefits, but the benefit of green in cities have been known for more than 2 centuries. So yes, we are recovering that knowledge and implementing it, but the next step is to use it to push a new vision of the city. Defining new ethical and theoretical framework is essential. In a paper of 2021, a multidisciplinary team of scholars from the University of Utah and Melbourne point out the urgency for, well, they were talking about urban experiments, urban ecological experiments, but they pointed out the urgency for urban ecologists, scientists, and all researchers involved in urban ecological planning for redefining their ethical framework, because of the complexity of the topic, ask them to redefine the frame in which to operate. So in conclusion, I think when addressing sustainable architecture and planning, there must not be a lack of theoretical and philosophical framework, which I think that there is, and which I think that it's because of the strong ethical force of ecological challenge. In my opinion, this is not sufficient. This is a priority, but it's not enough. We need a framework, a political framework, because we need a critical approach to those themes. Nature, plants, and biodiversity are values, but we can give them the proper centrality only if we question the way in which we manage, design, and ultimately think our cities. And that's my opinion. So please make a lot of questions, because I'm here to discuss.
So thank you very much, Bianca. So we learned that green doesn't mean always gold, and green doesn't mean always neutral decision. And that's very important to remember. Thank you very much. So I think we can open the debate time. So for any questions, if anyone has anything to ask, we are here. I will try to see. You can see your desktop. It's very nice.
I think it's somebody else's. I don't know how it got here, but I will stop the sharing of the screen.
Yeah.
Thank you for, okay, oh, sorry.
I have a question, if you allow me.
Sure.
First of all, thank you, Bianca, for this very insightful lecture. And I have a question related to the concept of ecology and related to urbanism and cities, and also the topic of bioarchitecture. We know that etymologically, the term eco from ecology in Greek language means oikos, a house, a place where I dwell. So radically speaking, the ecology would be or could be a discourse or a principle about the place where I or we dwell. And we know that ecology is considered as a part of biology. And I don't know if you agree, I think it is a very reductive, positivist approach toward what we consider under the concept of ecology. And therefore, the problem of the ecology, and I always put that word under quotation marks, or the place where we dwell, cannot be reduced to the natural environment or to the field of biology. So I'm interested in the concept of bioarchitecture, and what do you think about this concept, Bianca, and how would you define it? We know that bios is a moral, ethical life, a life lived in community. So not a mere organic life or something related only to the plants, trees, or animals. So we know also that architecture is some kind of form of life. So how would you define in your own terms the concept of bioarchitecture? It would be my question.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I answer? Okay. Thank you so much for the very interesting question. Okay, if I have to define it, I think that bioarchitecture is a research path in architecture that asks us to not to think in it's in a way it's a search for a traditional way of buildings and cities and to shape the environment. So it's an architecture, a design strategy that relies on the resources available, on the effect, on the very specific climate condition and geographical conditions and needs. And so in which resource needs and condition and external condition comes before the design and the project. And so in which is necessary to design without having a defined idea. You know, it's kind of designing outside of the development, outside of the growth path and technological development. And today, bioarchitecture, because of being inside, because of being not traditional, because of being inside in this technological development, is a very interesting, is trying to put some technological discoveries and knowledge in the use of resources. So it's more provocative. Well, it very depends on the solution used. It can be normally it's based on natural solutions, and natural materials, so like wood, bamboo, earth, every kind of different kind of working with earth and stuff. It uses it in a more conscious, modern way, but it sounds provocative. It seems provocative. I mean, I don't know what's your idea, but for example, in schools, in architecture schools, it's not so. It's taught, but it's not so common to study bioarchitecture, because it's more easy, because maybe, well, this is my opinion, it asks the designers to make a step, I mean, to give the space to the resource and then the material that speaks for themselves, and accept the opportunity that he has to deal with. So he is not the designer, she is not the protagonist of it. Well, coming back to your definitions, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the positivistic approach to science and to natural environment, to the research, because research is still like this. And I think that also this green orthodoxy is a result of this vision, of this always dividing vision. We need to divide, we need to split into parts to comprehend anything. We need to define, to divide, we need to classify. So I think it's very common even in technological research, not only in scientific. I agree with you. It's a problem. It's a problem thinking of ecology as part of natural science, and natural science as not part of all science, all knowledge, or the whole way of interacting with the environment. So the whole way of existing in the world. But I have no answer of which word could be more suitable for the goal.
Thank you. My point also was that somebody could say that radically speaking, or etymologically speaking, every architecture is bioarchitecture because it is related to bios, and bios is a life in a city, is life in a polis. So if you speak radically, so what is life and related to architecture? But okay, it is very, very, very inspiring.
Oh, sorry. It's sorry. I missed this part of the question. So I'm not sure that my answers to this part will be satisfying, because you are triggering some reflection, but I have no answers. But well, every kind of architecture is bioarchitecture. It's the same as considering. Life in the city. Yeah, it's the same as considering cities like ecological niches. So the environment that we shape as a species, right? Human species interact. We create society in a way. So we create cities, polis. So designing the space, the building that host this interaction is bioarchitecture. Well, I'm not sure about it. I mean, there's a lot of way of doing it.
Yes.
The point is that design is a condition to stay in the world. I mean, design, design project. It's the way in which we interact with the space. We historically did it. You don't need architects to be designers. You don't need to be architect to design your space. So radically speaking, we are all designers, and we are all bioarchitects or all biodesigners. Not that radically speaking, we need to question the way in which we stay in the city. So if we don't, maybe architects are all biodesigners. So let's talk about planners. Let's talk about the condition that we have, that the elements with which architects should deal with. Let's limit the architect. If architects are all bioarchitects, so let's limit them.
Thanks very much.
I have two questions, and one is a clarification. In the last part of your presentation, you were quoting a study conducted by American Australian scholars, like Utah, Melbourne scholars, if I understood right. And I kind of lost what the study was about. So if you can explain that to me. And second, there is my real question. So I am always a bit surprised when we are referring to green solutions, we are only referring to trees, when actually, when we are moving forward from the modern concept of nature, we know basically that the division between animal on one side and plants on the other side is a very not scientific distinction anymore. Contemporary biology is showing us since a century that we cannot split any very rigid and clear limit between organic and inorganic, or also among the organic, so clear distinction between animal and plants. So what I'm a bit surprised that in your presentation, animal didn't play any part of any sort. Also because I know you work with Emanuele Coccia, that is a philosopher showing us since a few years how much plants could be considered as living beings. So it doesn't treat plants as plants split by animal, but he consider plants as living beings, and we have to treat them in an osmotic relationship with our lives. So I'm asking to you, you think that green will be also like will mean also like moving forward the classic concept of nature, a kind of trying to include also animality, if I can say so, in our new way to live the cities and the public spaces, or we are still connected to a very modern idea, reality of nature that splits plants from animals? And I'm very curious about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the question. Okay, maybe I quickly start from the first one. It's a research. Maybe I can share. Well, anyway, I look for it. It's a research of some scholars from biology department, planning department, and ecology department in Utah and Melbourne. Utah and Melbourne University, sorry. They were talking about experiments in cities. So they were well, they were scientists acting in the city and saying with projects of greening or of natural-based solution, for example, drainage system based on water. So creating, putting some interventions in order to fix some environmental problems and monitoring them. They were saying, if we act in the city, even if it's an experiment, even if it's good, even if it's for a good intention, we need to monitor not only the environmental transformations, values, we also need to reflect before acting and while monitoring the act and the impact of experimentation. Maybe we need more instruction because as scientists, we have an ethical framework, we have some ethical requirements. Our experiment has some ethical requirements, so we need to follow some rules. But we never reflect on the rules of the city. So we are now called to define a new framework to act in the city. So one theme is acting and experimenting in the forest, and another in the city, which is very basic. I mean, it's not exactly what I was talking about. I mean, it's not planning. We are still in science and experimental dimension, scientific and experimental dimension, but it considers the effect of the city. I mean, the complexity of the environment. So I found it very interesting. And going to the second part, well, to your second questions. Yes, of course. Yeah, I didn't talk about animals for two reasons. The first one is because biodiversity in the official communication, official publications is more commonly defined as vegetation issue, so plant issues, and or impollinators. I mean, it's always referred to the even when talking about animals or insects, they refer to the impollination, so the survival of plants. So it's kind of an institutional position, which I was questioning. But the way the reason why, another reason is that I found it very interesting. Yeah, I worked with Emanuele Coccia while working with, well, I met him, and while working with Stefano Mancuso. So yes, the city for all living beings. It's a very interesting and very challenging. I think, of course, is the goal to reach. But in a way, I think, well, I have to admit that I don't put in this presentation any vision that I share, but there are. I mean, I have been critical because I wanted to be, but I did not suggest, yeah, the path that. Sorry for me, I have been not that courageous. Anyway, the point is that also that, yes, we can think about animals in city. We should think about city as a biodiverse environment, as the the scenario of whole living being. Maybe it's it's a human niche, ecological niche, but it's the house for every kind of living species. But before thinking of hosting and welcoming other animal species, animalities, maybe we need to remember that we are an animality, we are an animal species. So yeah, we need plants, we need animals in the city, but first of all, we need plants, we need both. It would be very interesting. Well, Emanuele, with Stefano Boeri, once again, Emanuele Coccia makes some very suggestive images in which he puts some cows on the Duomo church in Milan, asking, and the provocation was, we need animals to live, we eat them, why aren't they in the city? We need cows or pigs and stuff, or chickens. We live with them. Why are they outside of the city? Why are not here with us? In this way, cities are not self-sufficient, so they cannot survive. And that's true. That's true. I mean, we need a lot of natural resources, animals included. We need to give them the right space, the proper space in the city. I don't know if it's immediately possible. I think it's a goal. Just remember that we are part of these animal inhabitants of the city.
Thank you very much. There are other questions? Anyone has suggestions or?
I have a question, please.
Please.
Thank you, Bianca, for this very inspiring talk. I had a lot of questions, but I don't think I can formulate them right now, especially when it comes to the design of this ethical and political framework that you're talking about. A lot of of what you said reminded me of some issues that we had, that in the political literature we had when discussing the downfall of the welfare state, like the technocratic idea of planning, etc. And you kind of hinted to the need of this green framework, right? Because it's something better for the human life in the city. People are less stressed, etc. I guess my question is this bioarchitecture interested in catastrophes, you know, or is just like reshaping the city to the well-being of everybody inside of it? Or is there something like, well, how can we tackle natural fires? How can we tackle floods? How can we tackle the climate change and its effects on the welfare of the population? Do you see what I mean?
Maybe let me try to please tell me if I have understood. You are asking if this architecture, well, the green architecture is in planning, is tackling the goal has the goal to reshape the way in which we live in cities and making cities more livable, let's say livable, or more adapt, and or on the contrary, if it's working on like limiting the effects of climate crisis. So if it's working as with a defensive strategy, and very addressing very specific problems. Is it the question?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think maybe once again, because of the positivist position or vision of the and technocratic vision of the word, I think we are more in the second dimension, a second approach. This is because, of course, we have to admit that the catastrophes that we are facing are made it urgent to answer. So so it's true, we have to act. So they are the major problems that we are facing. But I'm quite sure that this is the only problem that we are, so catastrophes and flood risk stuff. So any climate change effect is the only problem that we are facing. And that's true because we are not questioning any other modalities of staying in the world, any other way. And we are not questioning, we are kind of questioning the way in which produce, but not that much. We are not questioning the way in which the development is driven. Citizens are not having many rights or less rights. I mean, political structure is not changing. We are just recognizing some emergency states, allowing political structure to work maybe faster, or asking companies to act in a more sustainable ways, but we are working in emergency state. We are not rethinking cities. But the point is that if we want them to be ecological niches, if we want them to be the way in which we live in the world, we need to rethink them, because now they have some lacks. We don't have enough space. They are not self-sufficient. So it's not only about climate change, it's about space inclusiveness, interaction, market-driven transformation, which are difficult to control, and which can transform it in unpredicted or unjust way. So yes, I think that unfortunately we are in the second, and I think that it's reflected. We can see it from the publication, from the literature about this topic, from the research about in this topic. But we can change the direction. I mean, this is I'm convinced of it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Gabriel. There are.
So, Andrea, if there are no questions, I have a question.
Oh, great.
No, I have a question before.
I don't know if it's never happened.
I want to. No, yes. I'm very interested. I mean, you are, maybe many of you are, but the most of you aren't architects and designers. And I'm interested in asking you which kind of, if you're comfortable with speaking of design as and planning as topic. I mean, if you think that it can really impact on the way in which we live and we interact in cities. So speaking of city, because speaking of domestic space, also referring to Emanuele Coccia, we know that it's very subjective, personal. But yeah, what if you are interested in the urban and planning, changing, transformation, design research or not, or what do you think about it? Thank you if you answer me.
So anyone wants to answer Bianca?
I can just add that it is a very vital problem, very important issue, and I always like to hear and learn about that. And it is very vital point we are facing today. So absolutely go ahead. And we are eager to learn and to read papers and work you will be writing.
Yeah, and also I think that the wounds from the pandemic are still very fresh, like for every one of us. So I think that the reflection of where we live, how we share spaces, are particularly right now, after we have been forced for kind of 2 years to stay close in our apartments. The issue is particularly like important and crucial right now. So we really felt what does it mean living also sometimes in unpleasure, like, or in not really like open spaces. And I think that today this topic is also very, very hot for this reason. We feel it more than before, probably. This is my opinion, actually.
May I also come in, just because I think like I'm in international politics or political science more broadly, and I think there has been a very distinct spatial turn in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, where people are realizing, not maybe they have realized this before, but there is now more research funding going into basically how power operates on a spatial level. I think both nationally and internationally. And I think, I mean, if we are talking about like, let's pretend that we are in Rijeka, everyone, and I think you can see here like how the transition politics really reshape public spaces and how that shapes not only the everyday lives of people, but also how politics are organized. And I think this is something that definitely you need kind of at least urban studies, if not also like design and architecture as disciplines, to really understand how these like different spatial formations, how they affect the way that social movements develop, the way that like the way that politics work. And I think there has been a lot about this in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. But as I was listening to you, and sorry that I had my camera off. I admit that I'm like with one eye and news from Ukraine, and so. But as I was listening to you, it also occurred to me like what I am working on especially is this also the division between the urban and the rural, because in political science especially, there is this kind of like you started the talk with, cities are where people are at, cities are where if we're going to find solutions for the future, this will be in the cities, and the cities are the future. And I think like a lot of people still live in rural areas, and there is this kind of, again, at least in political science, there is this prejudice against rural areas, as in like, the cities are progressives and full of hope, and the rural areas are these like, this is where the cows and nationalist people live. So I also wonder if we can think of design in a different way to like make these connections more visible. Like what kind of design would we need to kind of break apart this very strong, I think, division in like everyday people and like political discourse. So sorry, not really a question, but I did think in like terms of the rural more as you were talking about the urban. I'm sorry, I know this is the opposite of what you wanted, but but thank you for the wonderful talk.
No, thank you for the question. Yes, of course. Well, I have to admit that I live in the countryside. so after saying that cities are the future, I live in the countryside. Yes, I don't have cows, but I have I have some gardens. So anyways, so I'm very I feel very a strong commitment to the rural question. Maybe at this point of my research path, at this point, so it definitely can change. I think that for the way in which economical relationships and as they say, the relationship between countryside and rural areas and urban areas are structured, many of the problems of the controversy of the contradiction can be solved by working on the city, because now, for at least in Italy, it is like this. I mean, and this changes a lot depending on the country. So I don't want to generalize, but in city, I think that the way in which rural territory is shaped depends on the city. It depends on the way, on the consumption, on the goods that city ask for. It depends on the way in which, well, not only, but it can also depend on the way in which the city, the investor, the money that is invested in the city is distributed in the productive areas around the city. So I think, so yes, I've been enthusiastic in the introduction. That's critical. I mean, that's controversial, but working on the city means also working on the countryside and working on the relationship that links them. And we need to do it. And we did it. I mean, urban planning has been, for example, the question of the green belts, to have cultivated area around the city. So the way in which the property, for example, of the countryside, the property of a productive area, the property of a rural area, the rules that regulate production processes, they impact the city, because they can limit the development of the city. So it's interesting for the city, and it's regulated from the city, directly from the city. So that's why I put the city in the center of the discussion. Yeah, but it's a critical point, and urban studies is yeah, and that's true. We must have a more comprehensive and open approach to this topic. So thank you for the question. And please let us know if something has happened in Ukraine, something more, I mean, that we missed in 2 hours.
So thank you very much, Katerina. And there are any other questions, suggestions? Doesn't seem like it. So if Marco Luca is okay, if Sanya agrees, I think that we can end the seminar for today. And thank you very much, Bianca, for being with us. And I hope we can see each other soon in the next seminar, next appointment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me once again and for the discussion.
Thank you for a great talk. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.